Some say he was a Bolton, old Nan would always end. Some say a Magnar out of Skagos. Some say Umber, Flint, or Nori. Some would have you think he was a Woodfoot, from them who ruled Bear Island before the Iron Men came. He never was. He was a Stark, the brother of the man who brought him down.
With as much depth and detail as were provided in A Song of Ice and Fire, sometimes the story grows on its own. George R. R. Martin describes himself as a gardener, meaning he creates characters, plots, and scenes and all that. Then he waters them and watches it grow. The analogy really works if you think of the characters as branches while picturing George holding pruning shears while sporting a murderous gleam in his eyes. But even with the liberal removal of branches, leaves, roots, overused analogies, sometimes things grow in the same open spaces, meeting along the way. With the major details, any incidents like this is clearly intentional. But with the very small details, well, the story grows like a living thing would. In many ways, George may not have predicted. And that's exactly what he's aiming for. He wants this world to be like a living creature, so rich with detail that it lives and breathes as if it were alive.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of History of Westeros, a podcast dedicated to George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. Now, this is a rare episode that draws from the divergent show canon in addition to the book canon as we usually do.
Right, we're actually incorporating a lot more show knowledge than usual, but we have, controversial as that may sound, we have good reasons for doing it. You'll see, just stay with us. A few other intro items before we get into the meat of the episode. We will be doing a Reddit AMA on Monday, December 22nd. A lot of you will have just been hearing this podcast, and a lot of you are aware of that already. But of course, even if you're hearing this well after the AMA, it would be worth going to check out and reading some of the answers and questions that were posed. It should be a lot of fun. Another announcement that we have is that we've been talking a lot about ways to make the show more regular, to have more episodes, and to get more content for everybody. And one of the things that we're doing is we've launched a Patreon campaign. It should be visible by the time you've seen this episode. There may be a few of you that get to the episode really fast and it's not up yet. But it's going to be there. It'll be there for a long time to come. So most of you it'll be there by the time you're hearing this. Now, the point of Patreon is to support niche creators, meaning creators, people making content that isn't necessarily super mainstream. People can pledge to support with a dollar amount per month. And, you can manage yourself and lots of different creations that you're trying to support in a lot of different ways. Patreon was created by creative people, and it's really great. You should check the website out and view it for yourself. www.patreon, that's patreon.com. And we're at History of Westeros on there, easy to find. And we've got a list of different ways you can support the show, and some of those some of those things include benefits for you guys. And we hope you will think it's worthwhile and will pledge your support to History of Westeros so we can keep making more episodes more often. We're, of course, still on Amazon.com. If you go to historyofwesteros.com, you can shop through our Amazon links and support the show that way. Anything you buy through those links will give us a small hit. We've also had a lot of activity on our forums lately, which is great. You can join the discussions over there at www.historyofwesteros.com/forums. And get involved in a lot of the fun things we're talking about, including what things that are coming up in future episodes. You guys can actually participate in the discussion as to what's going to go in future episodes. And, of course, you can hear our thoughts as these episodes are in progress, where we actually try to figure out some of the plots and histories that we're going to bring to you in the podcast. So, that is all of the lead-up information and all of our pre-show spiel for now. So without any further ado, let's get into the episode itself. We're all excited to hear about Night's King. It's also really good to be back in our Religions and Magic series. It's something that we'll be coming back to frequently. We're not just going to keep putting out Religion and Magic podcasts straight up and not do any other topics. We're gonna bounce around a bit. But we're going to come back to this one pretty often, especially when we've got a great topic like this.
Yeah.
Night's King is a lot of fun.
Our last episode could have been History of Magic too, the Doom of Valyria, but we went with just history. But it was kind of like it was,
That's a good point. Yeah, partly is that we've kind of done most of our Religion and Magic stuff so far has been Northern related, and it's kind of sequential. We got the the werewoods. Well, the comet really is just everything, yeah. And then we got the werewoods, and then we've got Night's King, which is another Northern topic. But yeah, you're right. We could have easily. The Doom is very much a Religion and Magic topic. Yeah. It could have been that, but We didn't do that, so that's the way it is. Now, for a world to feel authentic, to feel real, it has to have its own unanswerable questions, things no character can ever know, like the real world is for us humans. There's mysteries of life that none of us could possibly answer. For a story to be consistent with what we consider to be that human existence, it has to have its own stories. Just like children on Earth have been told tales for nearly all of human existence, whether to scare them or to inspire them or to make them feel something. Those things have existed since about as long as language has existed. Now, in Westeros, there's tales of squishers, merlings, unicorns, dragons, and bats. These stand alone or are mixed with tales of great heroes or villains like, say, Simeon Star-eyes or Maddox, two characters that we'll be talking about a little bit in this episode. Now, some of these stories are actually true, though, unlike a lot of the fairy tales told in the real world, or at least rooted in truth in this case. Other times, George uses myth, legend, and or history to illuminate parallels with living characters. In other words, these stories are actually a reflection of what's going to happen. And sometimes he does both. Sometimes it's an illumination of history and it's foreshadowing.
Yeah, knowing that, we're always looking for these parallels. Parallels, not necessarily they're going to, repeat the events, but parallels. And so this topic, of course, provides many opportunities. Even though, we don't precisely know who the parallel to Night's King is, even if there even actually is one. But we do think that there is a parallel, or at least some parallels, and we've got some ideas on who it could be. And in terms of mention, the Night's King is a pretty obscure character. I mean, he isn't brought up at all in a Game of Thrones or in a Clash of Kings. He is mentioned briefly in both Feast and Dance, but it's the same identical mention seen from two different point of views, Jon and Sam.
Yeah.
And it's only mentioned in passing, something that Sam read, an echo at best, as any book of an age long before writing. So yeah, you can't, not much of anything. But he is also briefly mentioned in The World of Ice and Fire, but just like a small detail or two. Not much new to be found there.
So what we do know about Night's King is mostly in A Storm of Swords. There's a good bit there. Though we possibly learned some major things from the TV show. That's where it gets a little controversial as far as mixing canons there. Now, normally, like I said, that would be almost a controversial thing to say. Put the whole TV and show, you can't cross those streams. Well, that's because, in general, you shouldn't do that. And the show is a different animal, like a parallel universe almost, where things have worked out differently. But we usually treat it as such. In fact, I don't know that we've ever done something like this. But there are reasons to make an exception, which we'll explain as we go through the process. As the episode unfolds, you'll see why we decided to kind of wrap these things two together. But we're keeping them distinct as the details come out. Now, since we've got so little in terms of hard evidence to sink our teeth into, relatively speaking, there will, of course, be some conjecture. We have to theorize a bit. Apart from Night's King topics, we're going to have kinslaying. We're going to talk about the blue eyes of the others in whites, how important that is. Night's Queen, not just Night's King. We're going to talk about the lands of Always Winter. We're going to talk about Cold Hands. We're also going to talk about some of our favorite characters, Stannis. We've really been talking about Stannis a lot lately, but here he comes again. Bran, Melisandre, Roose Bolton, Jon Snow, Benjen, even. There's a couple of...
Talk about a bunch of different other legends.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot here.
Different tales.
That's true, many different tales.
But we're going to start with the castle that the Night's King supposedly ruled from, which is the Nightfort. And this is part 1, the Nightfort.
There's nothing here to hurt us, Your Grace.
Bran wasn't so certain. The Nightfort had figured in some of Old Nan's scariest stories. It was here that Night's King had reigned, before his name was wiped from the memory of man.
That is what it was, as for now, Maester Theomar of White Harbor referred to it as a ruin, a drear and dreadful place.
And now with any ancient topic, and this one is, extra ancient, we tend to lack solid detail. There wasn't anyone writing things down back then. That's what it comes down to. There was just no writing at that point in history. So, George R. R. Martin can't give us direct written history about the Night's King. Without such, we just have to explore the inferences made by, the few clues that were given and use some deductive reasoning.
Of course. The Nightfort is possibly the only place in Westeros where one could hope to find clues about Night's King. It's the only physical vestige from his era, as far as we know. Everything else being a haze of myth and story. Ultimately, all else is no more than wordplay, and words are wind, of course, we've been told that plenty of times. Now, abandoned by the Night's Watch about 200 years ago, 200 years before the start of the books, we should say, apparently because it was, quote, ruinously costly, it's the largest and most ancient castle on the wall. That it's the largest is an important factor in considering the power and influence Night's King may have wielded in his own time. As we've seen throughout the series, regions tend to be dominated by the most powerful castle in the area. The Nightfort was the chief castle on the wall until it was abandoned, so that's the vast majority of the wall's existence. The Nightfort was the castle. So the alpha castle, we'll say. It was likely not nearly as large when it was first built, however.
Maesters who served at the Nightfort whilst it was still in use made it plain that the castle had been expanded upon many times over the centuries, and that little remained of its original structure, save for some of the deepest vaults chiseled out of the rock beneath the castle's feet.
The fact that the tunnels and deepest vaults are as ancient as the castle really stands out. The place has been expanded on and added to, but the deep cave systems were intended by the original builders, or at least one of the very earliest to make changes. When we see the place firsthand, as we do with the quote starting this section, the tone is set right away by Bran's feelings of dread. But surely that comes, at least in part, from the many stories he, and we, have heard about the place, and none of these are pleasant.
Over the thousands of years of its existence as the chief seat of the Watch, the Nightfort has accrued many legends of its own, some of which have been recounted in Archmaester Harmoon's Watchers on the Wall.
Given how unpleasant these legends are, they may have something to do with why the place was abandoned, or at least why it was abandoned first, since so many other castles on the wall are also abandoned and empty. In other words, perhaps it wasn't just the expense.
But these stories are really old, probably thousands of years old, and the Nightfort was only abandoned 2 centuries ago. So, maybe the expenses are the answer after all. I mean, we lack a bit of perspective, too. I mean, as we all know, only 3 of the 19 castles on the wall are in use. And those castles are abandoned for known reasons, lack of manpower and money. So when we hear the same with the Nightfort, why question it?
Because of the cool stories. I don't hear those cool stories about the other places. Bran shares this curiosity that we have.
Once his uncle came to see father, and Bran asked about the Nightfort. Benjen Stark never said the tales were true, but he never said they weren't. He only shrugged and said, "We left the Nightfort 200 years ago," as if that was an answer.
Like us, Bran's similarly out of luck for now.
And now it bears mention that neither Mira or Jojen or Hodor are intimidated by it. Bran has also just been dreaming about the Red Wedding, which, just happened at this point in A Storm of Swords. So he was already full of dread and anxiety. And furthermore, Bran is a really young child whose ideas about the Nightfort, derive from tales told to him by an old woman who was trying to scare him with the stories. I mean, that's the point of scary bedtime stories.
Right. Then again, Old Nan's tales have a surprising amount of accuracy to them. We don't have time to go into all that in this episode, but trust us, throughout the times where a lot of you have probably noticed the same thing. Old Nan's stories tend to have a lot of, we need an Old Nan episode.
Barth episode.
That's right, the true oracles of Westeros. So pointing to her as a source may not actually discount the legends. It may actually, her endorsement may actually increase their credibility. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, she's not the only one with an opinion that matters either, though.
Even Summer was not at ease here. Bran slipped inside his skin just for an instant to get the smell of the place. He did not like that either.
So one thing that we're going to be sure to point out if we ever do a Direwolves episode, someday, is that if they like someone, that person is pretty much definitely to be trusted, with the possible exception of Melisandre. Probable.
It's always an exception, isn't there?
Yeah. And if they don't like someone or something, you better watch out, because there are exceptions to this as well. I mean, such as cases of direwolf on Tyrion, or a lot of what Shaggy Dog does.
Just in general.
I mean, that one he went after Maester Luwin after all. Yeah. But those are times when the wolves were, channeling their owner's anger. It was tense situations, so it wasn't their own natural reactions. And now, without going on a big org tangent, the point is that Summer had a negative reaction, though not a particularly strong one, to be fair.
Yeah.
This is nothing like, Ghost refusing to enter the Fist of the First Men. But it does make this place seem a lot more foreboding.
So to be clear, this is not one of those times when Summer is upset on his own. It is rather one of those times where he's upset on his own. He's not afraid of the Nightfort simply because Bran is. He's legitimately set off by something. We don't know what. Now, Old Nan, Bran, and Summer are all scared of the place, so that says a lot. But whatever might happen in the Nightfort, it didn't really happen. Nothing bad really happened during their time there after all that.
Yeah, only good things happened, really. He and his party met Sam and Gilly, who showed them how to get through the wall. And before that, there was this.
Sometimes Summer would hear sounds that Bran seemed deaf to, or bare his teeth at nothing, the fur on the back of his neck bristling. But the Rat Cook never put in an appearance, nor the 79 Sentinels, nor Mad Axe. Bran was much relieved. Maybe it is only a ruined castle.
And from that, it looks like Bran's fear seems to be, subsiding a bit, although Summer's may not have been. Now, a character that I'm worried about in terms of relation to the Nightfort is Patchface. I mean, it's like he's half dead already. And then there's this quote.
Melisandre's face darkened. That creature is dangerous. Many a time I have glimpsed him in my flames. Sometimes there are skulls about him, and his lips are red with blood.
Yeah, Patchface in the Nightfort seems like a bad idea.
But that's exactly where he's headed. Yeah. And here's another thing. Melisandre, not much really bothers her. She's hardly rattled by the fact that Stannis lost the Battle of the Blackwater. She's like, well, we're going to prevail because the Red God's behind us. But she's legitimately disturbed by Patchface. I mean, she's not disturbed by anything, so I think that's pretty important. But this isn't an episode about Patchface. We'll have to save that for another time, too.
Fools of Westeros?
So, no, Fools of Westeros, indeed. Yeah. So we're not ready to dismiss the old stories just because nothing terrible has happened yet. Selyse says something that might be very ironic, actually, and it kind of bodes poorly for poor Shireen.
Yeah. She must be kept from harm, and Eastwatch is where the attack will come. This Nightfort is the place my husband has chosen for our seat, and there we shall abide.
Yeah, good luck with that. So there are a few reasons to think A Song of Ice and Fire very well might not be done with the Nightfort. Stannis himself has declared it his new seat, along with Patchface. There's Queen Selyse and Melisandre and a bunch of others who were supposedly heading there. And since Mel has had a point of view chapter already, maybe she'll have another one at the Nightfort. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I mean, before all hell broke loose at the Wall, Selyse, Melisandre, and the whole gang were planning on living there pretty relatively soon, and this is despite Jon's warning about its current state.
That's a good point. The hell breaking loose at the Wall might change their plans, potentially, but I think maybe it's just a blip for them. I think they're still going to want to go to where Stannis told them to go. But in any case, the Wall offered few of the comforts that Southron lords and ladies and little highborn girls were used to. So both, all of them, were used to, and the Nightfort offered none.
However, I mean, it sounds functional enough from what the builders say.
Quote, we've got most of the keep restored and put a roof back on the kitchens. She'd need food and furnishings and firewood, mind you, but it might serve. Not so many comforts as Eastwatch, to be sure, and a long way from the ships should her grace wish to leave us, but aye, she could live there, though it'll be years before the place looks a proper castle.
So, I mean, if the story does take us to this point, it'll be pretty interesting to see how Queen Selyse and Melisandre handle this place. I mean, while the builders are, getting it ready, they'll probably find what's the most peculiar thing about the Nightfort, the Black Gate.
Yeah, we've talked about the Black Gate before, but here it comes again. A door made of weirwood with a face that talks. That's right, a talking white weirwood door called the Black Gate. Okay, so whoever built this made sure it would be useful, creepy, and confusingly named. So Bran's group was drawn to the Nightfort because Jojen dreamt of this gate. Not specifically, but just that was their way through. His green dreams led them to the Nightfort, though, like I said, it didn't specifically lead to the Black Gate. Sam did that, and he told them,
"We'll find this gate at the bottom of the well?" asked Jojen.
Sam shook his head. "You won't. I have to take you."
"Why?" Mira demanded. "If there's a gate."
"You won't find it."
Now, rarely is Sam so confident. It was Cold Hands who knew they would be there, telling Sam and Gilly that there would be people in the castle and about the Black Gate. He also told them that he was looking for Bran, although he didn't actually say the name Bran, just someone. Sam and Gilly, figured it out quickly enough, though.
Yeah, there's enough context clues there.
So maybe the builders won't find the Black Gate. Maybe some of the previous inhabitants didn't know about it either.
That's an interesting question. As we see, when Sam leads Bran and company to it, the Black Gate only opens because he recites his Night's Watch oath, and apparently the fact that he's already a sworn brother is important as well. But it's weird, though, because Cold Hands can't seem to pass through it, and he apparently is a sworn brother, although he's a dead former brother.
Yeah, and in general, a tunnel through the wall seems pretty normal, but I mean, not in this case.
Yeah.
Normal tunnels through the wall seem to be like the one at Castle Black. Not connected directly to the castle, but just next to it. We see the Nightfort's version of this tunnel type here.
The gate the Nightfort guarded had been sealed since the day the Black Brothers had loaded up their mules and garrons and departed for Deep Lake. Its iron portcullis lowered, the chains that raised it carried off, the tunnel packed with stone and rubble, all frozen together until they were as impenetrable as the wall itself. It's basically no tunnel at all anymore.
Yeah. So the Black Gate is a different sort of tunnel entirely. It's deep underground with a magical portal. But we have another reason to believe that it's unique as well, in addition to the magical portal. Given that Jojen dreamed that this was their way through, and more importantly, that Cold Hands showed it to Sam and Gilly, rather than, simply escorting them back to the tunnel guarded by Castle Black. In the show, Sam just reads about the Black Gate in a book, since there's no Cold Hands on HBO.
Yeah, HBO, you owe us a giant elk. But that does make it confusing, having Sam say that he read it in a book. Actually, when we were putting some of this together, that's how I remembered it. I was like, wait, how did they? And then I'm sure, I just got that from the show. I'm sure that happens a lot to some of you guys. You see something on the show and you transpose it with what happened in the books, and it gets all confusing. But anyway, the Nightfort is the central location for this crucial crossing of paths, and it's entirely by design. Cold Hands chose this spot, or was directed to by whatever's guiding Cold Hands, despite the fact that he cannot cross it. So that's interesting, right? Now, without firm conclusions, we can at least say that any way we look at it, the fact that this ancient magical gateway exists at all is significant. It raises questions like, who built it? Why or did they need such a gate? Doesn't the so-called magic of the wall already keep out these unwanted types? It keeps out Cold Hands, right? It is what we're told many times. However, whites can be carried through the wall if they're unanimated, or maybe even if they're not. We saw that happen already. And if that's Cold Hands, for a brother can't pass. That's kind of weird, right? The whites were able to kind of be carried through the wall, but Cold Hands can't. It's a little confusing.
Yeah, Night's King supposedly brought his bride, who was herself either half or fully an other, to the Nightfort. So how did he do that if even Cold Hands can't pass?
Yeah.
We might think that the gate was built after the era of Night's King, but this Sam quote contradicts that.
A hidden gate, as old as the wall itself. The Black Gate, he called it.
He being Cold Hands, which also tells us that Cold Hands himself is the source for the name Black Gate. His knowledge may indicate that he served at the Nightfort when among the living. Perhaps Bloodraven, the three-eyed crow, guided Cold Hands there, as Jojen's Green Dreams did. Bloodraven would not likely have used the gate during his tenure at the wall himself, as the Nightfort was already sealed and out of use for, around 150 years when he arrived at Castle Black.
Yeah, it's interesting if Bloodraven led Cold Hands there, how did Bloodraven learn about the Black Gates? It's almost like Cold Hands is the one who knew about it and maybe went there almost independently, or maybe they teamed up on it. It's curious. Another possibility, though, is that the Black Gate could have been altered somehow after its creation. Recall that the deep tunnels are some of the oldest parts of the Nightfort, if not part of the original design.
It's also possible that the Black Gate hasn't been used since ancient times. And, that would explain why no one talks about it. It doesn't seem to appear in any of the ancient Nightfort legends.
Yeah, we're going to be covering all those legends throughout this episode, and that's one thing we noticed. Black Gate's never mentioned as part of any of those, so that's pretty telling. This weird magical gate, just no one talks about it. So some have suggested that perhaps the others built the wall. Whoa. If you haven't heard that idea before, maybe you need a second. After all, why would a huge wall of ice keep out beings made of ice? And so if that logic is sound, then the Black Gate could have been originally man's way of getting through the wall. It was man's way of getting past the others. But that brings up a strange question. Why would you want to go through the wall if the others are on the other side? Also, curiously, Bran notes that the top of the door, as he passes through the Black Gate, his head touches the werewood's mouth, and it drips warm liquid on him. Warmth from the tunnel going through the wall. That is bizarre.
I think it's pretty clear that the werewood was drooling like our cats drool on us. I mean, pretty clear. It was a pretty happy werewood face. But, yeah. Anyways, but despite all that, I don't think it's a very strong theory.
No.
It isn't complete crackpot. But, I mean, it does bring up another question, yeah, exactly, of why man would want to get through and why the others would want to keep them. It's an odd theory to me, but
It's also way out of the scope of this episode to discuss whether the others actually built the wall. But if you're familiar with that theory at all, even if you aren't, just consider these possibilities for the Black Gate, and consider that's what it's kind of at least hinting as a possibility.
Yeah.
We're certainly not endorsing that fully, but you know how we are. We like to throw these ideas out there, and you can judge them for yourselves.
But to get back onto the major on-topic thing that we're trying to look out for in these ancient stories is the parallels to the main A Song of Ice and Fire storyline.
Right. So our best potential for these parallels seems to be these stories, the tales of told of the Nightfort. Now, a lot of A Song of Ice and Song of Ice and Fire history is colorful backdrop, but a portion of it is ironically not history at all, but foreshadowing. Yeah, it's fistory. That's the history of fighting.
I was thinking of something a lot
dirtier.
Yeah,
this podcast is PG-13, but
yeah,
you all got that.
So what we should do is take a close look at the tales told of the Nightfort. Since these stories are told alongside the Night's King, there could be major clues in these other tales, or at least a common thread that we can learn something from. So this is part 2, the ancient tales.
Ancient tales of fistory. This was where the rat cook had served the Andal king his prince and bacon pie, where the 79 sentinels stood their watch, where brave young Danny Flint had been raped and murdered. This was the castle where King Sherrod had called down his curse on the Andals of old, where the prentice boys had faced the thing that came in the night, where blind Simeon Star-eyes had seen the hellhounds fighting. Mad Axe had once walked these yards and climbed these towers, butchering his brothers in the dark.
Well, that's a lot of information right there. There are 8 ancient legends and horror stories that we hear of the Nightfort, appropriately told to us as night descends on Bran and company while in the ruined, octagonal kitchen.
Sort of a kitchen.
Ex-kitchen. Not really. I wouldn't cook there if it was me. But a werewood is growing here, adding to the feel of that scene that the old gods are present, and Bran himself feels that way.
So that's pretty cool. 8 stories in an 8-sided kitchen.
Yeah. The old gods just had to one-up the face of the 7, apparently. Years before, even before they even existed. No.
But most or all of these tales should be familiar. All of these come up at least once or more than once overall. Some of them come up before this story time chapter, we can call it. The World of Ice and Fire mentions some of them. Some of them are repeated on the show, so they pop up a lot. Actually, they're not just passing legends. And of course, the most notable and thorough of these examples come from these Bran chapters, though.
Yeah, it's a very subtle theme in Bran's arc, I think. I mean, it makes sense, as he's not only the youngest point of view character, he's the most fantastical character.
Yeah.
So, the children's bedtime story style starts at Winterfell with Bran in the comfort of bed, listening to Old Nan talk about the others. And then more stories come later, from Mura and Jojen while they're traipsing through the north. And then this is when, the tourney at Harrenhal in the Riverlands story comes out. And then finally, Bran himself tells the tales of the Night's King and other horrors in the very place that they occurred. And so and then we learn that this dark mythical figure was apparently Bran's ancestor as well.
By A Dance with Dragons, many of the ancient tales of the North prove true. The actual stories prove true. The children, the others, the power of the Green Seers, Skin Changers, the Black Gate, whatever we've left to see still. There's got to be more, right? So some of what we've yet to see amongst these stories of the Nightfort will likewise prove true as well. So pay close attention. Any of these things could come true in some way. We've numbered them, 1 through 8, in no particular order.
Tale number 1 is, of course, the Night's King. And now one thing that all 8 of the tales have in common is that they all kind of fall under the North Remembers umbrella. I mean, they're really old after all. A lot of them have inspired the writing of songs, which also helps to keep them alive. Though, as with all songs, a lot of the details are embellished in the process.
Yeah.
Lord Wyman even calls for 2 of the song versions of these tales during the wedding of Ramsay to fake Arya. People say fake, no one says Faria.
That's true. Fagon and Faria, yeah.
But,
we should say Faria.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because we know she's a fake, and the other one, I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
but still, that's a good point. Well, regardless, though, surely a lot of things about the Nightfort have been forgotten, but not these legends, no. Not only they remain, but they are well known, even when attempts are made to make people forget.
After his fall, when it was discovered that he had been sacrificing to the others, all records of him were destroyed and his very name was forbidden.
Which is why we call him Night's King and not whatever his real name was. Now, we're talking about him now. And apparently we know a few things, and so do you guys. So it was apparently too juicy a story to be entirely forgotten, despite the suppression of information there. Also remembered is that a woman was his downfall, and this may be related to why the Night's Watch doesn't take wives, and why they largely avoid women altogether, or at least that's maybe part of why it's told as a tale, a cautionary tale to the Night's Watch future generations. Now, Bran's thoughts here on the tale of the Prentice Boys, tale number 2, who were haunted by a ghost they all describe differently, are almost prophetic.
There was no thing that comes in the night. Maester Luwin had said so. If there had ever been such a thing, it was gone from the world now, like giants and dragons.
So we should definitely expect a thing that comes in the night, right? Because if giants and dragons are used as the examples of things that don't exist, well, then that one is in the same category, apparently. But the others come at night. Night's King had power at night. It's a familiar concept. Perhaps it's already there. We already have things that come in the night.
Moving on to tale number 3, we have Dany Flint, who was a girl who disguised herself as a boy to join the Night's Watch. And I mean, talk about the punishment not fitting the crime. She was, raped and murdered for this. And to make it worse, she had to have taken the Night's Watch oath already. And the gods, I don't think, didn't decree that the Night's Watch be male only, as far as we know, so her murder was perhaps an act of treason. I mean, the oath does imply men by saying, I shall take no wife and father no children, but hey, that part's just easier for women. So
Jon knows the story, though Tormund Giantsbane does not.
Her song is sad and pretty. What happened to her wasn't. In some versions of the song, her ghost still walked the Nightfort.
Jon thinks of her when considering the presence of female hostages who were supposed to be male, and it makes him think very carefully on how to handle the issue of his men and the wildling women living close together.
I'll send the girls to Longbarrow. The only men there were Iron Emmett and Dolorous Ed, both of whom he trusted. That was not something he could say of all his brothers.
Yeah, and none of them are in disguise, however, so they're not the best parallels here. These are just a bunch of wildling women.
Yeah.
An interesting one is far away in the south, however. This is a possibility. Oberyn Martell's daughter, Sorella Sand, is pretending to be a man, masquerading as Alaris the Sphinx. She is a novice who has forged 3 links of a maester's chain already, and the maesters do not admit women. We can hope she's never found out, or if her fate would be anything similar anyway. Although, to me, it doesn't seem like the maesters would be quite that violent. The maesters aren't an order formed from, a lot of former criminals. I think that's part of why Dany Flint's end was so bad, is that her fellow brothers were, a lot of them were just ex-rapists and murderers themselves. It was kind of natural. But the maesters, I think they would just kind of kick her out. I hope they.
Yeah, I would hope so too. Although it is an interesting connection that we have. We even have another connection from the Wall down to the Sphinx, and Maester Aemon saying that the Sphinx is the riddle, not the the Riddler. And so that's a faint connection, but it's another thing connecting her to the Wall.
It's true.
But yeah, hopefully she is only slightly parallel to Dany Flint. But so maybe that's not our connection then. Maybe Dany Flint, of all of them, is just a horror story, just a simple horror story. I mean, such tales of horror, it really, they frighten children and the most superstitious very well. But even those children, when being frightened, they usually become aware of the true morals in these stories. Like real-world fairy tales, there's always a moral of the story.
Yeah.
Sometimes a very dark and
very bad moral.
Yeah, sometimes a bad moral. Just straight up like, you need to squeeze your feet into these shoes.
Or you die.
Yeah, or you die. Or you get raped and murdered if you pretend to be a boy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the moral of Dany Flint.
Yeah, Westeros morals are a lot harsher.
Yeah. But so, embedded in these tales of the Nightfort are the morals of the North.
Yeah, you don't get, in our world, if you're naughty, you don't get presents. Here, if you're naughty, you die horribly or get haunted. So, such is the case with the Nightfort itself. Bran believes these tales, and so do many others. And as far as we're concerned, we need to be considering them as potentially real as well.
Yeah, in his text, Justice and Injustice in the North, Judgments of the Three Stark Lords, Maester Egbert notes that the crimes in the North in which guest right was violated were rare, but were invariably treated as harshly as the direst of treasons. Only kinslaying is deemed as sinful as the violations of these laws of hospitality.
Now, Maester Egbert says that, and our experience reading the book seems to agree. Kinslaying and violating guest right are about equal, and they're the worst, by far. Worse than normal treasons like just being a turncloak. So that's killing your own kin is worse than turning traitor on your lord.
You know what I think is even worse than either of those?
What's that?
Having a name like Egbert.
He should have gone with his last name, whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was.
So it seems to us that kinslaying and almost kinslaying really stand out in particular. Night's King himself could be a kinslayer, as he is said to have sacrificed to the others. Now, the only other clear example of this is Craster giving up his sons also to the others. Now, we can't be sure Craster's case is exactly what's going on with the Night's King. The others would probably take any baby given to them. They took Craster's, after all. But Night's King ruled over the Watch, and they don't have a lot of babies on their own. Night's King had his so-called corpse queen, and she may have given him children. Or maybe he was just giving the others Molestown bastards, if there was a Molestown back then. But there's also the issue of the whole "there is power in king's blood" quote, and we're going to see how that fits in.
It's tale number 4, however, that seems to, best highlight these northern beliefs, and tale number 4 is the Rat Cook. This tale is probably maybe one of the most well known. I would say,
I think so.
I would say it's comparably well known to the Night's King tale. And it tells of a man who violated guest right and was condemned to eternity as a kinslayer. He was transformed by the gods into a rat and forced to eat his own young over and over. Bran himself remembers this lesson and the person who taught it to him when thinking of this story.
It was not for murder that the gods cursed him, old Nan said, nor for serving the Andal king his son in a pie. A man has a right to vengeance, but he slew a guest beneath his roof, and that the gods cannot forgive.
And so thus there are at least 3 different northern morals embedded in here. Primarily the message that guest right is absolutely sacred and that his eternal punishment involves kinslaying. There's also, the approval of revenge, clearly stated to be a right, and yet invariably this is a privilege trumped by guest right. And so the Rat Cook is also a perfect example of legendary history as foreshadowing, because we have Wyman Manderly, who, though Wyman Manderly cooked the Freys into wedding pies, leading us to think of him, he did not actually violate guest right.
That's right.
Lord Walder Frey is the man whose right to vengeance was used as an excuse for an unforgivable crime.
Yeah, it's a bit odd. We have this tale that kind of plays out in 2 different ways. It's like 2 different storylines that are including like a lot of these lessons from the Rat Cook. The analogy of the rats works pretty well for Walder Frey too. The way he and his family have bred. Keep that in mind. It's widely been predicted that House Frey will suffer significant infighting, maybe eating itself alive in a way, when Lord Walder dies. Perhaps the gods will not truly curse Lord Frey, but his children and grandchildren will suffer the curse of the Iron Throne, if not themselves.
Note the suggestion of Qyburn.
A few Frey heads would do much to nullify the North.
Lord Walder will never sacrifice his own, said Pycelle.
No, mused Cersei, but his heirs may be less squeamish. Lord Walder will soon do us the courtesy of dying, we could hope. What better way for the new Lord of the Crossing to rid himself of some inconvenient half-brothers, disagreeable cousins, and scheming sisters than by naming them the culprits? Now, as hosts of this show, we've heard from a lot of different people. We get feedback, and of course we stay on top of what's going on in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. We can say with full confidence that it's no stretch at all to say that House Frey is the most loathed house of all. Not just in the fandom, but from the point of view of people living in Westeros. They're the least popular in the series and the least popular from outside the series. So that makes them pretty good villains. George wrote them well. So the curse is kind of real in that sense, simply because people believe it to be so. Everyone's treating the phrase like they're cursed, and that kind of makes it real in a sense.
Yeah. And so, moving on, tale number 5. Hey, we're only on 5 out of 8. Crazy. Tale number 5 is the story of King Sherritt And we're told that he calls a curse down on the Andals from the Nightfort, which is confusing to say the least. I mean, why is he doing it from all the way up there? Why not from his own castle? King Sherritt is not likely to have ruled a castle of the Night's Watch after all, right? I mean, the Night's Watch didn't have kings except for the Night's King. Perhaps King Sherritt was a first man who lost his crown in the south to the Andals and was sent to the Wall, still bitter about his being overthrown, and
That's
so he
possible.
cursed them.
Yeah.
But I don't suppose the curse amounted to much. The Andals are still around, and plus it's pretty arrogant for a guy to think he could curse an entire race.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But what if King Sherritt had a reputation as a dabbler in the black arts? Perhaps if enough people heard of the curse, it would have an effect because people believe in things like that, and just the belief makes it partially real, kind of like in the case of the Rat Cook. So, especially since one of the two brothers, if it's all this all sounds kind of vague and vast. If I was an Andal cursed like that, I'd probably just shrug my shoulders towards the north and forget about it. It wouldn't mean much to me. Maddox, tale number 6. This is possibly my favorite.
I don't think we mentioned any parallels for this one. And the only person I can really think of as a parallel is Stannis up there at the Nightfort. But it's just this one, just like Danny Flint, lacking an exact real parallel.
That's a good point. This is something that we hadn't really scripted in here, but that's a good point that you raised. The idea that maybe, especially if Stannis kind of loses, if he does poorly, if he's kind of bitter about the fact that he believes he deserves to be king and no one's supporting him, I could see something like that happen.
Curse out through lore.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say, who would worry about a Stannis curse? I might worry about a Melisandre curse.
Yeah, exactly. So, but a whole race, he wouldn't be doing a whole race. But maybe not any exact parallels there. But if you can think of a parallel for King Sherritt, let us know.
Yeah, that one was probably the hardest to come up with anything. Now, okay, so Maddox, tale number 6. He was a traitor to his brothers, but not to his blood brothers, rather his sworn brothers of the Night's Watch, whom he silently murdered in the night. This may be kinslaying. It's certainly treasonous. It also sounds vaguely like the 2 whites that rose at Castle Black, the 2 whites that had themselves been black brothers, especially since one of the 2 brothers seems to have killed the other one with an axe. I don't suppose a white cares much for being called a kinslayer, though, or oathbreaker, or anything like that. I don't even think they're capable of offering guest right. But in case I'm wrong, don't take bread or salt from a white. This whole thing is certainly evocative of the attack on Jon Snow. But that also wasn't silent murder. That was his brothers surrounding him, and they're being sneaky. It was silent. He didn't know their intent. But
like a silent murder,
that might be a stretch, but it's good to mention. It's definitely any kind of brother on brother violence.
Yeah, about betrayal on the wall.
Yeah, it definitely fits.
There's also the tale of the 79 Sentinels. That's tale number 7, which is a group of men who deserted the Watch. They eventually sought shelter with Lord Riswell, who was father to one of these deserters. He took them captive immediately, and we assume immediately because the alternative is that guest right was offered. Riswell returned them to the Watch, and he knew that his son would be executed, and he indeed was. He and his companions were set inside a hollowed-out section of the wall where they froze to death or suffocated, which that's a lot worse than like Ned Stark just beheading him. It's almost kinslaying again, and this Lord Riswell perhaps felt some guilt over it, and he eventually took the Black himself so that he could stand watch beside his frozen son. But really, I mean, I wonder if they ever still kill people like that on the wall.
Well, the only, I certainly have heard of that. That's pretty brutal.
It's pretty crazy.
When John was going to execute Janos Slint, he considered a noose, and he just cut his head off. Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. But I guess different Lord Commanders over the years, they come from different places. They have different things they do.
It came from like the Erie or something.
I guess it's pretty insane though. 79 deserters. Wow, that's a lot.
It's
right?
True.
Maybe that's why they needed to make such an example of them.
Yeah, they put them all. It would have been hard to just cut 79's heads off or hang. Like, we don't have the rope for this.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, they probably got to cut a pretty big chunk out of the wall to fit those guys in there.
Yeah.
So these 79 Sentinels were traitors by way of desertion. The father, Lord Riswell, torn between duty and family. One might say Lord Riswell was trapped. Either way, he's either got to choose treason or kinslaying. Or is it almost kinslaying? And that's a really important difference, the distinction. What separates the two? Where's that line? Exactly. Of all people, Victarion Greyjoy whistles with this question, and he's not even a northerner.
If I do not strike the blow with mine own hand, am I still a kinslayer? Victarion feared no man, but the drowned god's curse gave him pause. If another strikes him down at my command, will his blood still stain my hands?
Well, Victarion may be slow, but he's asking a very difficult and important question. This technicality is hugely important. It's the difference between, say, did Roose Bolton violate guest right by helping the Freys to do so, or is he technically hands clean? Certainly, the enmity they've earned from some Northerners is tied to the Bolton involvement in the Red Wedding. So even if he's not guilty, he's married to a Frey. He keeps Freys in his inner circle and counts Lord Walder as an ally. So, what manner of man counts an accursed family such as them as his friend? So Roose is suffering a little bit from that, perception-wise, but I don't know if it goes beyond that. So this alone has many standing against the Dreadfort.
Yeah, I mean, and if there are gods, how do they see it? The opinions of humans may or probably matter very little in light of where the old gods stand. And it's even more difficult to judge in the case of a supernatural proxy, like, is Stannis a kinslayer because it was his shadow that slew Renly? Not to mention the fact that he worships a different god entirely. How do we compare with lore and the old gods?
Yeah.
And so when Davos witnesses the birth of the shadow inside Storm's End, he thinks, oh, he knew that shadow, as he knew the man who'd cast it.
And Stannis himself, note what he relates to Davos here, that it's accurate. I dream of it sometimes, of Renly's dying. A green tent, candles, a woman screaming, and blood. Stannis looked down at his hands. I was still abed when he died. Your Devon will tell you. He tried to wake me. Dawn was nigh, and my lords were waiting, fretting. I should have been a horse, armored. I knew Renly would attack at break of day. Devon says I thrashed and cried out. But what does it matter? It was a dream. I was in my tent when Renly died, and when I woke, my hands were clean.
So Davos Seaworth could feel his phantom fingertips start to itch. Something is wrong here, the one-time smuggler thought.
In a sense, he was there, or part of him, both times. Davos recognized his face, and Stannis himself remembered in his dreams what his shadow did to Renly. So what we've been calling almost kinslaying might be hugely different in the eyes of the gods, if there are gods, though men may be confused like Victarion as to where it all falls into place. This might be the Westerosi way of getting off on a technicality, meaning Stannis and Roose and some of these other guys. As for the remaining tale, number 8, it's of blind Simeon Star-eyes seeing hellhounds fight. That's the tale. He saw hellhounds fight at the Nightfort. That's just weird, right?
Blind.
Yeah, how does a blind guy see hellhounds fight? This story is weird. And we'll have to let that aspect of the hellhound thing speak for itself, because we don't really know how to. I suppose the closest thing to a hellhound in the context of A Song of Ice and Fire is a direwolf, but
Yeah, direwolves are going to come up the wall.
yeah, and fight at the Nightfort
Yeah.
and do battle for our entertainment.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Hellhounds, I don't know, makes me think of dragons too. I guess they're not hounds, but they're hellish.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Some people, I can see how somebody might see them as hellish, but
Yeah.
set them on fire, they'd be pretty hellish.
Yeah. But anyways, the part interesting to us about that, besides the hellhounds, which is, I don't, a weird creature, is that his nickname derives from the star sapphires that he supposedly placed into his eyes. And so if you compare that to what it links him to, which let's just have a quote. We'll start with this corpse.
His flesh was blanched white as milk everywhere but his hands. His hands were black like Jaffers. Blossoms of hard, cracked blood decorated the mortal wounds that covered him like a rash, breast and groin and throat. Yet his eyes were still open. They stared up at the sky, blue as sapphires.
And of course, that corpse was brought to the other side of the wall, and later the corpse rose.
The sword laid the intruder open to the bone, taking off half his nose and opening a gash cheek to cheek under those eyes. Eyes like blue stars burning. Jon knew that face. Othor, he thought, reeling back. These eyes are such a big deal. George writes it 3 times in a row. That wasn't me, emphasizing it or anything. That's how it's written.
Yeah. So Star-eyes is pretty eerily similar to the way the others and the whites are described. We didn't just put you through listening to those gruesome corpse quotes for nothing. We're pretty crazy similar.
It's all about the eyes.
So here's another one.
All of them had pale flesh and black hands. Their eyes glowed like pale blue stars.
And even from Sam's perspective,
only its eyes lived. bright blue, just as John said. They shone like frozen stars.
And of course, in the prologue, the other halted. Will saw its eyes blue, deeper and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burned like ice. And
the theme of these intense icy blue eyes, well portrayed in the show as well, is prevalent. On HBO, the main visual cue that the human baby had been transformed was the change to its eyes. In show and books, other than Simeon Star-eyes, the icy blue star sapphire eyes are only attached to others in whites. There's no other place they pop up, so it's a hard connection that's hard to ignore. So the obvious conclusion is that Simeon Star-eyes was another?
White or another, but
yeah. Actually, that we might not be kidding about. That might be the case. Maybe some sort of good guy other, or... I mean, Simeon is always portrayed as a hero. He's mentioned alongside the likes of Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight and Serwyn of the Mirror Shield. So if you're thinking maybe that he's like Cold Hands, that's a good on you for thinking that. But the problem is Cold Hands doesn't have blue eyes either. Marinate on that for a minute.
Yeah, there's a pretty big mystery to keep in mind. I mean, other place that we've seen these eyes, the sky, for one, in this ominous constellation.
The clouds hid most of the ice dragon, but all but the bright blue eye that marked due north.
Yes. And
even the constellations support the others.
Yeah. Most importantly, though, for this episode's topic, the blue star-like eyes are associated with the queen, the bride of our man himself, the Night's King. And this is part 3, the Night's King.
The legends say that the Night's King was a warrior without fear, and when he saw a woman atop the wall with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars, he chased her and loved her, though her skin was cold as ice. And when he gave his seed to her, he gave his soul as well.
Notably, he himself does not have the crazy blue eyes, or at least we don't see that expressed anywhere unless you count the TV show. However, there was no female other on HBO that was talked about.
I don't know that we saw anyway.
That's what we saw, or anything like that. She, his bride, the Night's Queen, does have the ice blue star eyes and skin like ice. And then something about taking his soul after doing it, as it was written in the script, doing it.
Yeah, that's the appropriate way to say it, right?
Yeah.
He brought her back to the Nightfort and proclaimed her a king and himself her king. And with sorceries, he bound his sworn brothers to his will.
And so, whoever the Night's King was, before he crowned himself, it was this, like I said, the Night's Queen, who seems to have made it all possible. You know the old saying, behind every successful Night's King is a Night's Queen.
Oh yeah, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that one, yeah. Now, how tempting is it to think about possible descendants of these two? It seems like they'd all be dead, but the curiosity remains. It's possible. Bran hears from Old Nan that wildling women lay with others during the long night, creating half-human children. This could be what Night's Queen is, one of these hybrids that Night's Queen that he fell in love with. He supposedly chased and caught her, which does sound appropriate for wildling customs, huh? He stole her, right? That fits. But we're told he saw her atop the wall. Now, unless we're back to the theory that the others controlled the wall, we're interpreting this as he was at the top and saw her looking down. It's worded kind of ambiguously. But it could easily be that he found her in a ranging or something. Yeah. It's just loose text there.
Yeah. And here's a quote. For 13 years he ruled, until finally the Stark of Winterfell and Jormungand of the Wildlings had joined to free the Watch from bondage.
Wow, so the Watch was ensorcelled, and it took the Starks and the King of the Wildlings to break the Night's King and Queen. The skeptics would argue that this is superstitious influence and that the real truth was probably simpler.
Yeah, it seems like there are two main ways that the story can go, two interpretations, depending on how you like to look at things. There's the maesterly, none to low magic version on one hand, and the fantasy version on the other, where the sorcery mentioned here is very literal.
Yeah, we're happy to explore both possibilities and the space in between. But either way, we have to remind ourselves that the older the story, the more likely it has changed over time. It's been drift.
So as this quote shows, the oldest of these tales concern the legendary Night's King, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who is alleged to have bedded a sorceress pale as a corpse and declared himself king. For 13 years, the Night's King and his corpse queen ruled together.
Now, note again, that first line of that quote is the oldest of these tales, blah, blah, blah. So it's a very old story. There's also this curious repetition of the number 13 that keeps popping up. Everyone's favorite cursed number. 13th Lord Commander. 13 years ruling the Watch with his queen.
Yeah, maybe people got confused and the number got applied to both.
That's possible, definitely, yeah.
The length of his reign, 13 years or not, was ended by an epic team up.
Right. King of Winter, Brandon the Breaker, another Brandon the something. In alliance, it is said, with King Beyond the Wall, Joramun, brought them down.
Now, it sounds really just extremely odd to hear that the Starks and the Wildlings joined forces for anything. And not just because they have been enemies for so long, but, I mean, how did the dialogue even start up between the two parties?
Yeah.
Was the Night's King really so awful for everyone, for Wildlings and Starks alike?
I guess one possibility is that they didn't actually coordinate both of them were fighting the Night's King, and that just kind of helped.
True.
But maybe they weren't actually teamed up. But
True.
it makes it sound like they worked in concert. So
Yeah.
I wonder how that all came about. Now we're also told that the castles on the wall have no defenses against the south. It's their job is to guard from things coming from the north, not the opposite. So there is a strong indication, though, that this was not always the case. In fact, it seems that the Night's King himself was the reason for that policy. To ensure no new Night's King should arise, the castles on the wall are only capable of defending against threats from the north. So before that, though, perhaps the Nightfort was a normal castle. Maybe it didn't have this built-in weakness, we'll call it. We certainly need explanations for why it took so much effort for Night's King to be brought down, and this fits pretty nicely. There are some more details, however, of the fall of Night's King and on Brandon the Breaker. Check this out.
Thereafter, he obliterated the Night's King very name from memory. Some say because the Night's King was himself a Stark, of the same blood as the man who slew him.
Wow, that's pretty important. Night's King being a Stark. Now, if this is accurate, it could make Brandon the Breaker a kinslayer. And that's, of course, the quote indicates that possibility, and that is why he maybe tried to cover it up. Regardless of whether it's true or not, he probably endured talk of such, regardless of the truth of the matter. I mean, kinslaying is such a scandalous thing.
And the rest of the quote by itself raises a number of questions. I mean, the implication that Brandon the Breaker destroyed all records of Night's King makes sense on one hand and very little on the other.
Well, first, as the quote says, this particular Brandon may have been seen as a kinslayer, so suppressing records of that aspect of the story makes obvious sense. No one wants themselves or their family to be seen as kinslayers. Now, in the same vein, as the quote itself alludes, no family would want an apparent evil like this associated with them. So either of those would hold up as reasons on their own. So with both possibilities, it's easy to accept.
But second, however, is that, I mean, what does it mean to destroy all records? There was no writing back then, nor would there be for a very long time. And this could be dismissed as, an anachronism on par with those legends that tell of knights long before knights existed, for example. But also, the World of Ice and Fire reveals that many ancient legends are not as ancient as they seem. Sometimes, based on archaeological data or what have you. And so maybe the Night's King is less ancient than we're told. The efforts that Brandon the Breaker went through to suppress his existence clearly failed. Maybe they just only muddled the details. And perhaps the chronology is one of those muddled details. And even his name is a clue, but I mean, which kind of clue? The Night's King seems to refer to Night's Watch, right? But we might not want to assume that. I mean, what do all incidences of the others appearing on screen have in common?
Well, there's probably more than one correct answer to that question, but the one we're actually looking for is that they only come at night. So that's the conundrum here. Every single encounter with the others or animated whites comes at night. Sometimes it's like they can't wait for the sun to go down. When Bran and his gang are attacked just outside the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow, the sun's light has just faded from the sky. So I guess they needed to get there a little bit earlier to avoid that incident. This holds true even when applied to the TV show, as I said. I don't think we can be certain the showrunners caught this on their own. I suspect George R. R. Martin pointed out that it was an important detail that they had to keep including.
By the way, just now, when we said animated whites, it was because dead brothers, Jafer Flowers and Othor, rose as whites, but they did so at night as well. But during the day, they were blue-eyed corpses. The blue eyes meant that they had already, been taken over or changed or whatever you want to call it. But they were dormant, perhaps because it was day or because of some sort of intelligent plan. The dogs and horses were afraid of the corpse already, and the people were spooked as well.
Yeah, so something had clearly already happened. Some sort of transformation had already happened. But when those corpses rose, it was at night, and they had specific targets in mind: the Lord Commander and the First Ranger. And they killed the latter, and thanks to Ghost, John prevented the former. So it's definitely curious. Now, the same aspect of the others and whites seems to apply to Night's King as well, as Bran recalls.
Night's King was only a man by light of day, old Nan would always say. But the night was his to rule, and it's getting dark. That rhyme threw me off. I was like, yes.
The Night King was only a man alive by day, an old man would always say. I
Yeah.
didn't even realize that rhyme. But yeah, so it's interesting too because what do you know? What do we have here? Is it the Night's Watch reference? Is that why he's Night's King, King of the Night's Watch, or is he King of Night, or is it just both? They both fit, so his name is perfect. If he was sacrificing to the others after the wall was built, which he must have been if he was the 13th Lord Commander. Supposedly there was no Night's Watch until after the long night, right? Okay. That's awfully simple. Or not, no. Well, this would at least semi-confirm that the others have existed since they were defeated at the end of the long night, meaning sort of what we're told is the others come in the long night and they haven't been seen since until the beginning of the story. Well, that clearly is contradicted by this. If he's sacrificing to them and someone like Craster maybe is sacrificing to them, what does that mean? What does it mean to sacrifice to the others when they're powerless or weaker on power? Is this his way of trying to bring them back, or a way to keep them at bay, or to make them stronger? It's hard to say. Now, his connection to Night itself and the Night's Queen, not Craster, Night's King, are part of this range of reasons to associate him with the others. So the idea could be that the others had control over the Night's Watch in a semi-direct way like this, which is kind of hard to comprehend. It's weird to think about the others controlling the Night's Watch as behind the scenes. It just doesn't feel right, but it's possible.
Yeah. The skeptical version of the story, story number 2, is supported by a pretty interesting possibility with this quote. Some suggest that perhaps the Corpse Queen was a woman of the Barrowlands, a daughter of the Barrow King. Now, Barrowton is a pretty strong power in the north, and in the days when there were many kingdoms in the north, an alliance like that might have been really powerful. And it could help explain why the Starks needed help. I mean, in ancient times, it took the Starks at least 200 and perhaps 1,000 years to compel the Barrow Kings to submit to Winterfell.
Yeah, they were powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. So, Night's King may have nothing to do with the power over night, or it might not mean to imply some sort of darkness surrounding him. It could just mean King of the Night's Watch, an abbreviation. He and the Barrowlands joined forces through the Barrow Queen, and were a very powerful combination.
Yeah, it could have just been that.
Yeah. Nothing magical there. It just got, turned into something else. Crazy.
Just people told the stories, and people like to embellish, and it became over thousands of years of telling. People added these magical details here and there. The name Night's King makes it sound like something's going on like that, but there's no reason to believe that that's absolutely true. Now, this aggression, of course, will not stand. It is very much against the vows. I will hold no titles, etc. Remember, so Night's King. He either way, whether he was a fantastical sorcerer king or a guy who carved out his own kingdom from the Night's Watch. Either way, he was breaking the rules. So it's a possibility that creates more possibilities. The idea that Night's King influenced the vows by setting some so-called bad standards. We've gone over a few of those already. The change in the way the castles are done, possibly impacting the vows, fathering no children, holding no titles, seeking no glory, etc. Right? They didn't necessarily get it all right the first time when they drafted the rules. You can't imagine it's not perfect. You can't write some sort of amazing, perfect set of rules that covers every possibility that you haven't even foreseen. So there's definitely some room for some of these things to be changed, especially since those rules clearly weren't written down back then. There was no writing. So
true.
The rules were all just kind of the spirit of the rules what mattered, I think.
Yeah, amendments might have occurred, and they added this after the Night's King, or something. It wasn't against the rules then, but they realized it was a problem. Or not.
Or not.
More directly referenced in the legend is a pretty central, recurring theme, and though I guess maybe it's easy to miss. The idea that love is the death of duty, and vice versa, which is presented to us by Maester Aemon. The Night's King broke his vows and turned on his brothers. That's really what it comes down to.
For love.
And we're supposed to believe that a woman was his downfall, such were the potency of his feelings for her. But it seems more to me like he was probably doing plenty to cause his own downfall. I mean, she probably surely isn't innocent either.
Right. We just don't, it's this common trope in fantasy and real life to blame the evil woman, but.
The evil seductress.
It seems like they were in concert together here. It doesn't matter anyway. But this theme is seen before all over literature. Fiction in general, it's just everywhere. And in A Song of Ice and Fire, too. Not just here. Doomed love. Love across cultures. Cultures generally unacceptable to each other or to either culture. and the like, that kind of thing.
Tale of an other and a human.
Yeah, so sad. Now, we haven't seen nearly as much of that paired up with sacrifice to strange and probably malevolent creatures of ice and mist. But hey, the Starks have given a lot of their children to the Watch. Isn't that kind of the same thing? Maybe the kids who became White Walkers have a better life than the kids given to the Wall. Who knows? Maybe the White Walkers are actually really happy, really well adjusted to their cold.
Warmer, yeah, well adjusted to the cold, yeah. But what do we have then after all this? I mean, is it the case of a rogue Lord Commander who tried to carve out a kingdom with powerful allies, or is it a tale of a sorcerer king who mated with the others and controlled the minds of his fellow brothers in arms?
Ultimately, I guess we can't know right now. Maybe George will reveal the answer to us. I don't think we ever will know for sure. But it really is fun to come up with the possibilities and potentials. Now, since George R. R. Martin only shows us things through point of view chapters, yeah, there's no easy opportunity to show us this or to give us more on this topic. It's all ancient past. Even Bran, like seeing through the Werewood Network, might have a hard time looking back specifically these thousands of years to see that, some sort of specific event. But hey, that could happen too. But there's this scene in season 4, episode 4, which is not possible in the books at all. There's no point of view character in the Land of Always Winter, at least not yet. So there's no way to witness the scene. The scene I'm talking about, of course, is the one where the Walker picks up Craster's newborn child, left by Rast, because Craster's dead by then.
Mm-hmm. And the other rides north. He rides really north, past frozen lakes, mountains, everything. The scene just goes on a bit longer than usual to really give a sense of just how much of a wasteland this extreme north is. But there's something there, and it looks like a frozen city. The rider delivers the child to an altar where 13 figures can be seen in the distance. One approaches, and we get a look at him. He doesn't really look like the others. He's got like these spikes on his head.
Yeah, he looks, his face is more like clean or whatever.
Yeah, and he soon touches the child, and he turns the child's eyes blue. And now the kicker to this scene, though, is that HBO leaked some details about the scene, the major one being that they refer to this leader other as the Night's King. And this was supposedly an error, but they never clarified what the error was. It could easily be that they didn't mean to release that character's name, or it could be that the leader other is not the Night's King after all. It was a weird mistake by some person working at HBO.
Yeah, so now you see why we're involving this mixing book canon and show canon. With a detail like that, that's just like, whoa, this guy is supposedly Night's King that we've seen on screen, on TV? Yeah. What the heck? Yeah. He had these weird horns that were kind of like, people sort of describe them like crown-like.
Yeah, but I feel like it's more likely that the fact that there was 13 is weird too to me. I don't know what I think. I go back and forth between thinking that they know something or that it was a weird thing.
Yeah, one thing, another weird number that 13 comes up is the last hero. He has apparently went north with 12 companions, so that his party was 13, and they apparently all died and vanished, and only he found the children of the forest. That sounds more like Bran, except for Bran didn't really lose anyone along the way. Well, in the show he did.
Yeah, in the show he did.
But and the elk. They lost the elk. In the book they lost the elk. Poor elk. And maybe they lost Cold Hands. But in the show, so that show scene, we've seen nothing like that in the book, so we can't fully trust it, even though there's, like we've said, there's good reasons to consider it as a possibility. But perhaps we can't trust it at all. So that said, there's some good reasons to do just that. In terms of the important details regarding the nature of the others, I'm somewhat doubtful that the show will go too far, even though they've twisted a lot of other things. I don't think they're going to just completely change something that's that central, something that fundamental. It's possible. Now, they can do things like change the appearance of the others.
To be fair, that does do a lot to how our perception of the others are.
Just alone, you're right.
It has. I find it hard to picture the actual depiction of the others. I see those creepy White Walkers, and it kind of has skewed my opinion of them as being so inhuman because of that. Yeah. But they still look kind of vaguely human, even in the show, but... Yeah. I
mean, it's like, would they fundamentally change dragons or Bran's powers? I mean, they might, but...
It wouldn't be so crazy if they gave the dragons 4 legs on the show instead of 2 legs. Like
that's true. That wouldn't be crazy. That's more of a cosmetic
that's appearance thing, but that would be, less crazy to me than them doing what they did to the others.
Yeah.
Because, it's a pretty big difference between how they look.
That's true. So that doesn't have to be convincing, but at least it should give some credibility. So if you insist on believing nothing from the show, well, we're not going to argue with that. We won't argue with that at all. It's entirely possible that the show has nothing to do with what's going to happen in the books. But some of those things are going to turn out to be parallel. And you can maintain that we haven't seen Night's King because of that, or that this ritual that we saw isn't a reflection of how it works. But if you think we haven't seen the Lands of Always Winter in the books, now think again. Part 4, the Lands of Always Winter.
Finally he looked north. He saw the wall shining like blue crystal, and his bastard brother John, sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. And he looked past the wall, past endless forests cloaked in snow, past the frozen shore, and the great blue-white rivers of ice, and the dead plains where nothing grew or lived.
So this is Bran's third chapter of the entire series, in book 1, of course. So again, it's kind of one of those things. It's not exactly the parallel to the whole thing that we like to say, the whole they give us the answer. George gives us the answer before he gives us the riddle. But it's kind of like that. We're not really familiar with what's happening in the story. And this is the only glimpse of the lands of Always Winter. And it's in Bran's dream really early in the book. So yet another reason why rereading the series is so valuable and awesome. It's a whole nother story each time. So at this point, we've just, at the point of this chapter of this dream, we've just recently seen the others in the prologue. So they're not only fresh in our mind, but at the point when you're a first-time reader, this is all you've got. You've only got these few chapters you've read. So these ice demons that you've seen in the prologue are still fresh in your mind. You're thinking you're going to see a lot of them. You don't realize that you won't see them again for a while. Especially as there's little else going on in the story at that point. All you've got is, the king showing up and Bran falling, and there's like, who are these Lannisters and all that. And you've got like a Dany chapter. There's not much else going on. It's not a sprawling epic yet. So this information at that point, your own perception, reading it the first time, it's very important.
Mm-hmm. And additionally, this description in the dream sounds a lot like what we saw on the show.
It does.
As the writer carried off the baby, we saw a lot of different landscapes, including a frozen lake or river and a frozen waterfall. And we certainly saw the dead plains where nothing grew or lived.
Now, John growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. That's an interesting part of that dream. It sounds a bit like he's turning to ice himself, but it perhaps is more likely a metaphor for his death, his quote-unquote death, however that turns out, or whatever form his character takes if he's resurrected / animated. Mm-hmm. Now, Bran's dream continues here.
North and north and north he looked, to the curtain of light at the end of the world, and then beyond that curtain. He looked deep into the heart of winter, and then he cried out, afraid, and the heat of his tears burned on his cheeks. And so this place is so cold and makes him so cold with it that his tears feel as if they're extremely hot. But more importantly, the heart of winter was terrifying to Bran.
Now you know, the crow whispered as it sat on his shoulder. Now you know why you must live.
Why? Bran said, not understanding, falling.
Because winter is coming. And remember, that raven speaking to him in his dream, that's Blood Raven. That's the three-eyed crow. Keep that in mind.
And so the straightforward interpretation says that they are becoming active, that they're on their way. And there are a lot of different theories as to the nature of the others in winter and the seasons and all that, but we can't really raise nearly all the possibilities on an episode on The Night's King.
Yeah, even though we like to go on tangents, that's just too much. Obviously, we've seen the others bring winter, in a sense, with them. It gets incredibly cold when they're nearby. Seems pretty straightforward, I suppose. The TV show distorts this a bit by leaving us with an image of dismembered bodies arranged in a specific way in that prologue. This might make a few of us forget that in the book, it seems to be some sort of pure localized cold that killed these wildlings. They were frozen to death. And it's heavily but subtly confirmed that it was the cold of the others, not some sort of overnight chill. Sir Waymar Royce, despite his arrogance and his naivete, he really noticed something that was important, which was that the weather was too warm for such a thing. The wall he described was bleeding, not bleeding, or crying rather, which is or weeping, when the wall is melting slightly. The wall is drooling. So in this context, it seems that the winter is coming refers to the White Walkers as a threat on their way, gaining power, the scene's changing in their favor, or whatever it is. We don't know exactly, obviously. But something along those lines.
The general tone of that.
Yeah, the general tone, exactly. So are these sacrifices a key part of their returning strength? It would be funny if Craster, by himself, triggered the return of the others by what if I just do this, Probably not. He lives his male sons out just because he wants no other men around, right? Yeah. No. And instead of disposing of a child, he creates a White Walker and then acts like he's doing it to please the gods. No, he probably knew what he was doing. And apparently, as we covered in another episode, it seems like he came from a place where this seems to be something passed down to him. His mother apparently maybe was doing some sacrificing, and the village
should have sacrificed him. Apparently,
the village he came from, White Tree, there was evidence of human sacrifice there, even when Jon and the old Baron and the rest of the party passed through there. But I think that any conclusion like this is premature. A good possibility, perhaps, but we can't go any farther than that.
You said Baron at first. I'm like, wait, what was Baron?
After all, even the world of Ice and Fire, which is from a skeptical, maesterly perspective, implies the existence of such beliefs.
Some accounts say that there are those who worship different gods, dark gods beneath the ground in the frost fang, gods of snow and ice on the frozen shore.
Now, Night's King was also said to be sacrificing to the others, as we've pointed out a few times. Though, if the portrayal of him in the show is any indication, he is an other. Perhaps he was not always one, though. So let's not assume the being who changed the baby into another White Walker that we are assuming is Night's King. This HBO slip-up could be the wrong kind of slip-up after all, as we've said. It could be they just put the wrong title on this guy. It's kind of hard to figure out how they would have done that, but again, it's possible.
They meant White's King.
White's King. But if not, well then, wow. We might have actually seen the other's home base in the TV show. And there were 12 figures standing behind this figure on TV, so 13 total.
Here's a quote. Bran looked at the crow on his shoulder, and the crow looked back. It had 3 eyes, and the third eye was full of a terrible knowledge. Bran looked down. There was nothing below him now but snow and cold and death. A frozen wasteland where jagged blue-white spires of ice waited to embrace him. They flew up at him like spears. He saw the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled upon their points.
This is vaguely reminiscent of the ice altar we see in the show. The ice, the spires and all that. Ice waiting to embrace, like being changed into a creature of ice, that kind of thing. The dreamers impaled on their points could be those who have been made into White Walkers. Yeah. But no, probably not. These are just dreamers he sees. He's a green seer, not some ordinary child. Yeah. It does make me wonder if anything special happens to a baby with green seer blood. What if like green-eyed or red-eyed kid and they touch him and his eyes turn blue instead? What is it? Maybe one green, one blue?
That would be interesting.
That's what Simeon Star-eyes is. She's a green seer who's half other. In case you didn't know, Simeon Star has one green eye, one blue eye.
Yeah, we didn't actually mention her at all. She also does make me bring some comparisons to the Night's Queen. I have to say a little bit.
Well, I guess so. A little bit.
Some slight comparisons, especially with Bloodraven having been interested in him being tied to it.
Yeah,
but I just realized we never talked about her, not once. But anyways, on to this quote. He was desperately afraid. Can a man still be brave if he's afraid? He heard his own voice saying, small and far away. And
his father's voice replied to him, that is the only time a man can be brave.
We didn't really need to quote that part at the end of the dream, but it's a classic quote. It makes me think, and Aziz think, of a thing said of the Night's King, that he was a warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him, for all men must know fear. And so, as we remind ourselves of the main storyline, it's a good time to check in there. How does the Night's King legend relate to our favorite characters? What does this tell us about their futures? So, we're going to move on to part 5, the new Night's King.
Now, we said it before, and we're going to keep saying it. If George R. R. Martin throws out a detail, it might mean something. But if he throws out the same detail twice, it almost certainly means something. Night's King comes up too many times and not be significant. There's something to his legend and or surrounding story we're likely to see, directly or indirectly, in the main story. But just as Night's King has been mentioned several times, so have a lot of the Nightfort legends.
But perhaps we will actually see an actual new Night's King of sorts. Maybe we can figure it out by seeing who best fits the descriptions.
All right, so let's start off with a list of the possible candidates. It's a little bit mind-blowing. Get ready. Brace yourself. Put down your coffee. Don't be holding your baby either.
Yeah, everyone's holding their baby.
Everyone's. It's very common for our listeners to hold their baby while they listen to our podcast. Didn't you know that? No, the list of candidates, though, here it is. Jon Snow, Stannis Baratheon, Roose Bolton, Bran Stark, Benjen Stark, and Cold Hands.
Yes.
Okay, we'll give you a second to recover from that shocking list.
Now, some of those are really thin and crackpot, tinfoil, definitely. Whatever you want to call it. They're fun to think about, and that makes it worthwhile. Some of them have quite a few eerie similarities, but regardless, all of them have some slight parallels, and it's just good to think about that.
Good to cover all the bases, yeah. We don't want to leave anything out. Because the Night's King ruled the Night's Watch and was a Stark, Jon Snow has several surface similarities of note right there. He certainly started to take the Watch in a controversial direction, not necessarily the same as conquering them and ensorcering them or whatever, but maybe over time, that's what it would have been seen like by history. History could have seen it that way. Interestingly, Jon parallels Brandon the Breaker in a way, rather than Night's King. by befriending the wildlings to fight a common enemy. He was probably the first guy to do that in a long time. But now he's dead, kind of, and he's a potential return to life makes him a kind of a cool choice for some sort of misunderstood hero or dark anti-hero or whatever. So could Jon, join the others somehow or something along those lines? Or could he be forced to bring Bran down? That would be the brother of his, or the other way around. Bran brings him down, maybe. Regardless, one of the qualifications for Knight's Kingitude seems to be you have to have a Knight's Queen, I suppose. So who would that be?
I'm going to call it and say that Jon is Knight's Queen.
Okay.
That's my call. No, but Val has blue eyes, dresses in all white.
Mm-hmm.
Jon finds her alluring. She's the equivalent of a princess, but we don't really have much else there. Not a lot. No,
That might be a dead end.
Yeah, it's pretty dead end. The so-called corpse queen had extremely white skin, magical abilities, power over a king. Does this remind you at all of Melisandre? I think it does. But going back to Jon Snow's Night's Queen, I think he's Stannis' Night's Queen. He's got magical abilities, power over a king. No,
interesting.
He's dying. No, I do see some similarities between him and Night's Queen and Night's King. He could be them both together.
It doesn't. Yeah, we don't have to imagine that they're married or it doesn't have to be that kind of relationship.
But
but it does remind me of
Melisandre.
It does remind me of Melisandre for many reasons. That quote, or that not that quote, but those details. She had been slowly realizing Jon Snow was in her vision, not Stannis. She was able to trick Ghost. It seems. Does that indicate that she has power over Jon, or could have power over Jon? Maybe. Further similarities exist when you take into account that she might be ancient, possibly undead herself. She doesn't need food or water or sleep. Not typical traits for things that are alive or human. A corpse queen, indeed, in a way. That's in a lot of ways that kind of makes her like a corpse queen, almost literally. And she certainly has convinced some people of some things.
Yeah. The war has been waged since time began, and before it is done, all men must choose where they will stand. On one side is R'hllor, the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. Against him stands the great other, whose name may not be spoken, the Lord of Darkness, the Soul of Ice, the God of Night and Terror.
Well, with opinions like that, actually, a lot of people did buy into it, as crazy as it sounds. So that could be considered the ensorceling of minds, especially through the haze of passing eons, right? It could look that way many years later. She's also made human sacrifices, which that kind of lines a bit with the others, or with the Knight's Queen / Knight's King stories that we've heard. Now, another scary thought about Melisandre, though, perhaps she doesn't realize that her god is the evil one, or that her god is just as bad or uncaring. Maybe her magic will destroy the wall. There's been a lot of theories out there that the wall will come down, and Melisandre is associated with a lot of those possibilities. Or she may be the other woman to Stannis' Night's King. That kind of more of a direct parallel. Yeah. I've had some great mispronunciations.
Shay maybe Bay. That's kind of I think that's what you said. Shay maybe Bay.
Shay maybe Bay. Yeah. Fisting.
Yeah, she may
Fistery. Fistery. Yes, yeah, this is important. Fistery.
Yeah. But anyways, back to Melisandre. Though her skin is pale, her eyes are not sapphires or icy blue. They're red. They're really red. And she is anything but cold to the touch. She's really hot. So, in a lot of ways, she's the opposite of the Corpse Queen. And if we imagine the inverse of her, we might be dead center, That said, Melisandre's glamored. Nothing may be as it seems. Her eyes may be very blue. She may be cold to the touch without her little glamour going on.
Yeah, we don't really know what she looks like. And it's almost like she's the exact opposite of this description in that way, except for the pale skin.
Yeah, except for the pale skin.
You got red instead of blue. You got heat instead of warmth. It's like she's like the opposite or something.
Yeah.
But,
except for the pale skin.
Yeah, except for the pale skin.
Black and then true opposite.
Yeah. That makes more sense. Yeah, she's like burned black, like Moqorro.
Moqorro, yeah. It would be more evocative of Moqorro. That's true. That'd be cool.
Now, another connection, again, to Melisandre. Jon's path to life again, maybe through the same magic that brought back Catelyn and Lord Beric Dondarrion. Will she have undue control over him? Well, probably not, though. It doesn't seem like Thoros was able to, make Beric do things, and certainly he's not controlling Catelyn, so I guess not. But Melisandre is very manipulative and charismatic and convincing and all that. And she's focused intently on a goal that she thinks she understands, but we readers know that she's made some pretty big mistakes, so she doesn't fully understand what she's doing. But she's clearly had strong influence on just about anyone that's come into her path. She is just really, really dominating personality. Stannis, of course, the main player in that game.
Yeah.
He gets dominated too a bit.
Yeah, and so of course, King Stannis is a compelling parallel to the Night's King.
Yeah.
In Daenerys' vision at the House of the Undying, she sees, glowing like sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. I mean, that's clearly Stannis, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that he cast no shadow seems to refer to his role in fathering 2 shadow babies, stripping him of his strength.
That's right, his shadows are gone. That's why he doesn't cast one.
Yeah.
Is the brave Sir Onion so frightened of a passing shadow? Take heart, then. Shadows only live when given birth by light. And the king's fires burn so low I dare not draw off any more to make another sun. It might well kill him. Melisandre moved closer. With another man, though, a man whose flames still burn hot and high. If you truly wish to serve your king's cause, come to my chamber one night. I could give you pleasure such as you have never known, and with your light fire, I could make...
A horror. Davos retreated from her.
Is this the kind of power Night's Queen wielded? It sounds familiar. The quotes from the legends tell us she took his soul when she gave her his seed too. That's like a perfect parallel right there. Stannis is impacted severely by sleeping with Melisandre. Davos sees him and he looks older, looks weaker, and then Melisandre flat out says so. So that's a big parallel there. And recall the dreams about Renly's death. That was only the first shadow. And doesn't that raise an interesting question? So he has those dreams about that shadow of being in Renly's tent. Does he also have dreams about the other event? Does he have dreams about throwing Courtney Penrose out the window? Mm-hmm. Regardless, he handles it. He's after all, he's Stannis.
Yeah. Stannis Baratheon was a man of iron will who neither understood nor forgave weakness in others.
Reminds me a bit of a line about Night's King again that we've touched on a few times.
A warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him, for all men must know fear.
A man who knows no fear also does not know what it means to be brave. It's all the same. Such a person has nothing to overcome, after all. There's nothing to worry about. And so this kind of person wouldn't understand the weaknesses of common men. It's kind of similar to Stannis in that regard. Yeah. So he's declared...
I would say I feel like Stannis does. We do see, even when we see him thinking about the death of Renly, we see that maybe that the thought of him as a man of iron will, isn't a full picture of him. That we do see that side of him as well.
Yeah,
he does fear some things.
He's more flexible than he seems.
Yeah,
he is rigid.
We talked about that. Yeah, in our Wit and Wisdom episode.
That's true.
But
anyway, he's declared his seat to be the Nightfort. He's an actual king. He's got the Night's Watch kind of under his control. Not directly, it's not like giving them orders, but we saw how he kind of bullied them around a bit.
But conversely, he's firmly against the others, staunchly on the side of mankind. I mean, or so he thinks.
So we think. No, that seems pretty clear.
Yeah, something important would have to change, or. Could it be that the Night's King was a good man, but, like Stannis, just not loved? A man who did what he had to do, who earned respect, but hate at the same time.
Yeah, it could just be the way the stories are told about it that make him seem so bad. Talk of Night's King was silenced after all, but the truth could have been something else than what has come down to us after so long. History is written by the winners, after all, and Night's King didn't win. So if we're to witness Stannis turn to Night's King-style arc, something along those lines, it could be in response to his sort of ends justify the mean style pragmatism. Although there is some indication that he's kind of changed his attitude in that regard. But it still could be the way he goes. It could serve to show us the path the true Night's King took, doing what had to be done, doing what he believed was right, but using dark magic for justice and to win if need be, and to justify the means. Once again, if he loses the Battle of Ice and survives somehow, as unlikely as that is, he could become desperate. Now, such desperation could be a turning point for him. He could be willing to take extreme measures.
And if not Stannis, perhaps another great power in the North is our parallel to the Night's King. I mean, regardless of whether we think that he's going to be an actual Night's King or anything like that, Stannis is clearly a parallel. He clearly has lots of similarities, but so do other characters. Other characters also are evocative of the themes presented in the Night's King tale. But if we steer towards the more skeptical Night's King interpretations, Roose Bolton could fit, with Lady Dustin of Barrowton as his so-called corpse queen, or the Barrow King's daughter. Right. Theon even flatters her by mentioning her potential to be such, and she in turn mentions Roose as a new king in the north. Dreadfort instead of Nightfort, I suppose. He gives up his Frey wife and their child together, perhaps as a sacrifice. No, that's out there. But he does have reason to go to the Wall, at least, to clean up Stannis' people and a few other things.
Yeah, so Roose is definitely a possibility. It may be a thin possibility, but worth considering. He's got, he's one of the few people in the North that has the level of power that you could equate with the same sort of power.
Yeah, and he's got an alliance with the Barrowlands.
Yeah,
So-
it's there are definitely some good comparisons there. As for Bran, well, Bran, he's a Stark, check. Power of the Old Gods, check. Has a dark sorcerer beside him, check. Got another kind of non-queen
Yeah.
there. Who says Night's Queen has to be a woman or even a bride?
Yeah.
Marry a tree instead. He doesn't have anything to do with the Night's Watch though. At this point, like he's met Sam. That's he may have power to take over people's minds. He did it with Hodor, and he's getting more powerful. He's also living in near complete darkness. It was kind of neat. He's like all this power living in the darkness. It's sort of there. Benjen's another possibility, but another pretty thin one. He is a Stark of Winterfell. He's disappeared. He's a brother. He's a Night's Watchman. That part is relevant. And some people think he's Cold Hands. We don't really think that. No, it doesn't. There's a good. We can't get into that too much. That's a whole other topic. But
I don't think it's crazy. People who think
it's not
he's
crazy.
Cold Hands. I think it's a strong possibility. I know me personally. I kind of hope that we just never see more of Benjen. That's just sometimes things just end. Sometimes there's no resolution. Someone dies out, but we'll probably maybe get some resolution.
Well, at least maybe
there.
find
A
out
lot
what
of people
happened
would
to
be
him.
really upset if we didn't find out anything about Benjen.
Yeah.
Myself, I would be very pleased.
Huh, that's cool. I don't think I've heard that before. That's neat. I kind of like that though, because it's just like, well, we just never found out.
Yeah, it's a big beyond the wall. Like
Who knew?
He attacked some people as a white, and then he was killed and burned. Whatever.
We saw the other members of his party were dead. Yeah.
Anyways.
So really the thing with Benjen is just that we don't know where he is, what he's doing, and so random
theories.
mystery in the North, other random mystery in the North. Maybe they're connected somehow. So there's really not a lot to go there. But maybe he comes back as somebody. Maybe he's the new Simeon Star-eyes. But really, where is Benjen, George?
Yeah.
You might have to tell us that.
Yeah, Cold Hands himself, though, has a few things going for him. He was killed long ago, according to Leaf, which, the Child of the Forest. He knows the Nightfort very well. Notably, he knows the location of the Black Gate. He was clearly a brother of the Night's Watch. But, on the other hand, he might just be a corpse animated by the Three-Eyed Crow.
Yeah, he just could be complete nobody.
Yeah.
So how about that for a wide range of mystery possibilities, folks? Night's King could be anywhere from everything we've heard about him, the mythical sorcery guy who wielded power over the Night's Watch, to Benjen Stark, to a dead black brother nobody remembers at all. So really, you could say that we haven't drilled this mystery down at all, have we? We've just you're maybe more confused than you were before. No, just kidding. I think we've opened up a lot of possibilities, a lot of ideas, and prepared you for what might happen in the future books. Night's King is a mysterious figure, and I suspect he would be even if we had a lot more detail. This is, again, because of the fact that he's such an ancient, extremely ancient figure. But we don't have a lot of detail. We can't do anything about that. We have myths, we have legends, we have the rest of A Song of Ice and Fire to guide us. There's different ways to look at it all, but we do have at least a wide range of possibilities and outcomes. So it's just it's vast.
Yeah, so hopefully we've done a pretty good job of working with what we have here. I mean, because despite the vagueness to his story, the Night's King legend does seem important, and the other legends that we mentioned too. Much of it could be foreshadowing, if only we've the eyes to see it.
Yeah. It might just be, that was what it was foreshadowing.
Yeah, it might be something like, yeah.
We'll realize, we should have seen that.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, when The Winds of Winter hits the shelves, if there's anything related to the Night's King or the Nightfort or any of the other subtopics we've touched on, well, you'll be ready for it. Not much will get past you. That's all for today, folks. We hope you've enjoyed our Night's King episode, part 4 of Religions and Magic.
Be sure to go check out Reddit. If it is the 22nd, we might still be doing our AMA, so go check it out while it's up, or at least read.
Just see read it and read the results. Check out our website, www.historyofwesteros.com. We've been putting more work into that, and I've started occasionally putting up some little mini blog posts, little details, little fun topics, small things that aren't big enough for a podcast.
Yep, there's a subscribe field. You can subscribe to our website if you want an email notification when we update the episodes there, or when Aziz posts a little blog post.
That's right, and of course, please check out Patreon, www.patreon.com/historyofwesteros. Like I said, it may not be up by the time you listen to this episode, but it really should be very soon. And from every episode from now on, you'll be hearing about it. So there'll be more details on that. Of course, once again, check out our forums. Check us out on Amazon.com. Check us out on SoundCloud. We're at History of Westeros on Twitter. And of course, we're at www.facebook.com/History of Westeros. And on Gmail, we are westeroshistory@gmail.com. Email us questions, concerns, criticisms, critiques, or send us pictures of your favorite Song of Ice and Fire characters.
One more thing, one of the Patreon rewards we have is that episodes are going to be, for some people, episodes are going to be released early, a few days early. We haven't settled on exactly the range of that yet.
Right.
About 5 days early. That isn't going into effect, obviously, for this episode, but that will be going into effect in the future, so it's another incentive to go to Patreon.
That's right. The main goal with Patreon at the moment is to get enough support to have a regular episode at least once per month on a regular set schedule, like a certain time, like maybe say the second Thursday of each month or the second Sunday of each month, something along those lines. And the other important thing we get to do with that is, at some levels, here's just a couple of the ideas that we've had that you'll see on the Patreon page as well. We're going to give access to our scripts, to our documents, to people who support the show at a certain level. That should be a lot of fun. We're also, at the very highest levels of support, we're going to allow people to choose the topics, to vote on which topics we're going to do. There's going to be a very small group of people that are going to be eligible for that. It's going to be open for only a small number of people.
Yeah, we'll give you like 4 topics. Maybe sometimes we'll do just give us your ideas, and we'll see how that works.
Right.
How the implementation of that works.
Sometimes that'll be far in advance because sometimes it takes us a few months to develop an episode, but that will be very important going forward, and so you guys will have the opportunity to get more involved with the show and to influence the content we have on it. So. That is all still in development, is finally getting started, though. We're glad to have, finally, after talking about it for so long, we're glad to finally be launching that. So keep an eye on that for updates, and we'll see you guys next time. Valar Morghulis.